Hey there, Around the Layout listeners. With advanced previews of upcoming episodes and monthly giveaways, now's the time to become an operating crew member. For just $3 a month, you'll get an exclusive membership sticker, your name listed on the operating crew roster, and automatic entry into our monthly giveaway drawings. Just as important, your financial support keeps all of our episodes from behind paywalls and free of those annoying car insurance commercials you hear on other podcasts. Joining the operating crew is quick and easy. Head to patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. And if you missed that, you'll find a link on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And thank you for being a listener. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me on this episode, coming to us from North Texas, Mike Armstrong. Mike, welcome to the show.
Ray, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you. It was great to see you in Texas. Another stop on the tour around for the Texas Express, the 2023 NMRA National Convention. And yeah, we're still talking about it. We're recording now in late October. It was in late August, and we're still covering all the events that happened at that big convention there in Texas.
Yep, it was a great convention, no doubt about it. I actually didn't get out to the convention, but I was on short time, came back to Texas just for my open house. We were spending the summer in Minnesota where we could escape the heat, but came back, and it was really a pleasure to meet you, Ray. I'm glad I ran into you, and I'm glad you were able to visit the layout.
Oh, I was thrilled to see it when I saw it on the tour, and it was the open day that I had. It was a busy schedule, a busy week, but I saw that, and I was like, I got to go over to Mike's and see this layout. And boy, I am so glad I did, because right from walking in the door, I was just blown away, and it's such a beautiful layout. We're going to get to that part of the story, but so awesome that you made the trip back to Minnesota just to open it up so folks like me could see it.
Yeah, I was glad to do it. And of course, I had planned that for about a year. My wife stayed up in Minnesota and held down the fort up there. And I came home and opened up the house. And we had about 150 total come through. So it was very successful. And everybody was well behaved, and I was real glad to be able to show the Rock Island Midcontinent route to the folks that visited.
Well, that's 150 very fortunate people who got to experience your layout and get to see the beautiful work that you've done. And I'm so thrilled to have you here on the podcast tonight to share your story with our audience. So let's get started. Let me ask, because I know this is part of, that leads into a big part of the why of your layout. Tell me, how did you get started in model railroading?
So I really can't remember a time that I wasn't really mesmerized and captivated by trains. My folks, they basically always said I had a one-track mind. And I guess I was probably about 5 years old. This would have been in 1961. My father picked up a secondhand American Flyer S-gauge train set, and we would set it up on the floor. I have two brothers, and so we would just set it up on the floor and play with it. When that was fine for a couple of years, but then I guess it was about 1963, just a couple of years after that, I received a great Christmas gift, and that was a Tyco train set that I was able to, again, pretty much play with on the floor for a couple of years until we built about an 8x8 plywood layout, just your plywood Pacific type layout with very little scenery, but I was able to lay some track and put a little bit of scenery on it, usually just the grass mat that was rolled out. It was pretty poor overall, but for a 9-year-old kid, it wasn't too bad.
We don't call it poor. We call it humble beginnings, right?
There you go. Very humble beginnings. And this was at a time when I was like about 9 or 10 years old. I was really a rail fan as well, and lived in central Iowa in a town called Nevada. And on the north side of the town, and it was only about 4 blocks from my home, was the Chicago and Northwestern's main line between Chicago and Council Bluffs, Omaha. And that main line had a lot of traffic. And of course, to this day, it's a very busy piece of railroad. That was on the north side of town. Then on the south side of town was the Rock Island. So I spent a lot of time kind of bouncing between the two railroads, and I would get all that enthusiasm with the prototype railroad and go back into the basement and play with my HO scale train set. And I had a paper route in the 60s, and that gave me enough money to buy some of those Athearn blue box, shake the box kits.
Yep.
We had a local hobby shop over in Ames, Iowa. That was about 8 miles away. And I was able to go over there on a Saturday once in a while and pick up a car or two and assemble those. But it's interesting that during that time period in the 60s, I loved, of course, all things railroad. The CNNW really, I think at the time was my favorite because my uncle, who worked for the Northwestern, lives in Chicago. I think kind of helped me gain a fondness for the CNNW. But as time went on in my years and looking back, the Rock Island, I think, was the one that really stole my heart. Just had so many great experiences with that Rock Island. As an example, my 11th and 12th birthdays, this would have been in, the 67, 68 timeframe. My parents would take me up to Iowa Falls, which was about 35 miles away from Nevada, put me on the Rock Island's train number 17. It was called the Plainsman, and I would ride the train down to Des Moines. So it was about a 70-mile total trip. So it was only about a little over an hour because the train probably averaged 60 miles an hour or so. But what a great experience that was for me to be able to ride one of the last Rock Island passenger trains in the 60s. And
so they put you on the train, and then what they
Yep.
do, they pick, and then they would drive back and pick you up. So you kind of rode the train by yourself down?
Well, the first year, my mother rode with me. And then the second year I went solo, and it was,
Wow.
it was really great. So, and of course it went right through Nevada, and I would look out the window, and this would have been on a weekend, I think probably a Saturday, most likely.
Right.
And the agent may have been there because oftentimes he was called in on Saturdays to hand up train orders to the passenger trains for meets and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that was just a great experience. And then with my uncle that I mentioned working in Chicago, occasionally I would be able to get in there with my parents, and then they would leave me for a few days to kind of go bumming around with him on railroad business. And then he put me, once this happened, he put me back on the Rock Island out of Chicago back to Des Moines. And that would have been probably, I think, about 1966 or 67. So it was probably the Des Moines rocket or the Corn Belt rocket. I'm not sure which one it was, but what an experience that was as well. And again, it just built those Rock Island memories in my brain. And I think what happened is that, with the demise of the Rock Island in 1980, there went a fallen flag that
Right.
was really kind of a big part of my childhood life. And I just gained such a fondness for it. I thought, eventually at some point in life, I'll model that portion of the Rock Island between Kansas City and Minneapolis.
Perhaps one of those things where your absence makes the heart grow fonder kind of thing, where it's not there anymore. So it makes you kind of love it even more.
I think that's very true. I agree with that. And the Rock Island had a very storied history. It had a lot of ups and downs, bankruptcies, and it was kind of the underdog. And I guess kind of root for the underdog in this case, just because of how it was and where it operated and the impression it left on me. But I was then about, I guess when I was about 12 years old, we ended up moving out of Nevada, and we moved to Dubuque, Iowa, which is on the very eastern side of the state. And once we got, we actually lived in a couple of houses there in Dubuque. We rented a house for a while, and then we ended up moving into another house. But that gave me an opportunity. Even in the rental home, I built a railroad. I put up another 4x8 layout, of course, all HO scale.
Yep.
And I actually think it was more of a 5x9. In those days, you could actually get 5x9 foot plywood, which gave you just a little bit more room. But I had more fun with a train running around in a circle with about 3 or 4 switches for industries and a small switching yard. I had as much fun with that as I have with my big layout today. Just, I guess it's, there's just something about running those trains that I always loved. But then along came, high school and into the 70s. And I built I would call it kind of more of a shelf layout. It was maybe about 3 feet wide, about 14 feet long along the wall. And then it did balloon out on both ends. So I had kind of a reverse loop on one end, and then it was just a yard on the other end. And that was in 1971 when I started that. And that took me through high school. 1974, I had a lot of fun with that layout. I actually started playing around with ballasting track, which I didn't do well at that time. It was just, that was a struggle. But then it was off to college. 1974, I headed off to Iowa State University and still rail fanning. The nice thing about Dubuque, where I went through high schools, we had the Burlington Northern, we had the Illinois Central, Milwaukee Road, and for 1 year that we lived there, the Chicago Great Western, which of course ended up getting merged into the Chicago Northwestern, and it didn't last long in Dubuque. They ended up abandoning a good portion of that shortly thereafter. But I still had a lot of fun watching the Milwaukee Road IC and Burlington Northern in Dubuque. And then off to college, at Ames, which that's the Chicago Northwestern's main line right through there. And so I was still out on weekends taking pictures and bumming around the tracks and that kind of thing. And still, I'd get home on weekends occasionally, not very often, holidays, once in a while on weekends. And I'd go down to the basement in my folks' home and I'd play around with the trains there. So it really never left me, even somewhat in college. The only thing I really did in college was operate at my folks' house once in a while. And then I had some friends that were O-gauge modelers, and they gave me a couple of kits to work on. And I would take some HO scale kits and work on them as well. But it was very subdued when I was in college as far as the model railroading aspect. I could much more easily do the prototype rail fanning than I could the modeling. But I end up getting through college, graduated in 78. And, there's a lot of history in between the 72 timeframe and 78, where I was heavily involved with a railroad museum in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Where I would spend my summers up there, even when I was 15, 16 years old, as a handyman. I had a job there working for $40 a week, cleaning the toilets and refilling the pop machine and painting coach cars and cleaning out boiler flues and things like that. Just, I was in heaven. I was able to work at this railroad museum, and then I got promoted up to a steam locomotive fireman, where I did that for 2 summers. My last summer of high school and my first summer in college, I was actually the fireman on the steam locomotive there for those summers. And again, I love steam locomotives. I guess I grew up with diesels, so I probably am more in love with diesels than steam, but I love steam, no doubt about it.
What an amazing experience. How did you even get connected with that? How did that all start?
Well, again, that's through my uncle who worked for the Chicago Northwestern. This museum, coincidentally, it's called the Midcontinent Railway Museum.
Yep.
It's in North Freedom, Wisconsin, and it's a former branch line of the Chicago Northwestern that my uncle and a few others were kind of the founders of it back in 1963 is when they acquired that branch. It's 4.5 miles long, and then built this museum that to this day is really a fantastic museum. They aren't running steam right now. They're running diesel because of all the new federal requirements on boiler inspections, but they've got plans here, I think in the next year or so, to bring some steam back, which will be a huge plus. But no, that was a wonderful experience. And then and during that time, this is also interesting, I guess, to me it is, because it was such a wonderful experience. But in 1974, the American Freedom Train, as you recall, ran the country in 1976. Well, in 74, they ran what was called the Preamble Express. And it was basically a train that was to run the route of the American Freedom Train, to just check the route and to court and host the host city officials, basically, wine and dine them and make sure that everything was going to work out okay for the American Freedom Train. And the train was an ex-D&H U-23B locomotive and about 4 cars. And a friend of mine was able to get me and 2 of my buddies on that train between Madison, Wisconsin and Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we actually got to ride the head end over a portion. And this would have been over the Milwaukee's main line, actually between Portage, Wisconsin and Minneapolis, St. Paul. That was a tremendous experience to be able to ride the head end of the American Freedom Train, or the Preamble Express, rather.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And boy, that uncle got you set up pretty good, and he had a great influence on you, but he couldn't quite convince you on Chicago Northwestern. You still had a love affair for the Rock Island.
Yeah, I sure did. I still stuck with that Rock Island. And so anyway, I end up leaving college and going to work for the Burlington Northern Railroad. And a few of the summers during college, I was able to work for the BN as a summer engineering aide. That was another great experience. And so once I graduated and started my career, I got married in 79, and I started with the BN in 79. The career kind of took over my life. It was a railroad career, very demanding. I started and spent my whole career in the engineering department. So my purpose and my role was to essentially maintain the track structure. And one thing about the railroad, in these positions, they start you out, of course, through a training program, but then they throw you right into the fire. And so I was worked as an assistant roadmaster on some production gangs where, building new construction, new track, relaying rail, replacing ties, that kind of thing. And if you do okay there for a couple of years, then they throw you into a roadmaster position, which I had a couple of roadmaster jobs, and that was out in Colorado, one in the Denver terminal and then one out at Brush, Colorado. And those are 24-hour day jobs. You're on call. Anything that goes wrong, you handle it. You're responsible for it. And that just kind of kept building. After the roadmaster's jobs, I was then promoted into the assistant superintendent roadway maintenance out in Denver. And again, now you've got you don't just have a territory, a roadmaster's territory. You've got about 6 or 7 roadmasters reporting to you, and a lot of traffic, a lot of problems, a lot of issues, a lot of derailments at that time in the 80s. But I was loving every minute of it because I ate, drank, and slept railroad. And so it was a great career. But when it came to the model railroad, it kind of put a damper on that for at least the first 8 moves. We were bounced around to about 8 different locations. And then we finally landed, this was about 1986. So from 79 to 86, there was about a 7-year period where I was just doing the prototype thing, It's all I had time for. And then in 86, I took a position, was promoted into our system office, which at that time was in Overland Park, Kansas, which is a suburb of Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And so we lived in that area, and that gave me an opportunity to start my first true model railroad as a prototype railroader. And I didn't have a very, very large railroad there. It was I think it was 8 by 12 and a couple of loops, but I had a little more time in that job to devote to the modeling. And so I would be able to go down on weekends and run some trains. And I never really did a lot of scenery and that type of thing on that particular layout, because it was, again, it was a little constrained for time, and I was more into just getting the track laid and running some trains. So had a great time. But then about 4 years later, we moved back out to Colorado, and we had a really large basement there. So I took advantage of that, brought what little I could salvage from our Kansas City home layout and took it out to the Denver area. And we were there for only about 2 years. So I made some progress, again, got some track laid, ran some trains, but then it's off to Texas. We ended up moving down to Texas here. And I built a layout in our 10 by 20 foot garage. Okay. It was a single stall. We had a 3-car garage in the home we were in. And one of the single stalls, which was 10 by 20, was dedicated to my freelanced model railroad. At that time, I wanted to just kind of try a freelance, and I built what's called the Minneapolis, Omaha, and Western Railroad. And it's kind of a play on an acronym, MOW, for Maintenance of Way, yep, which was my livelihood.
Right.
And that layout was actually featured in the August 1998 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman. That was a fairly small layout compared to what I've got now, but it really helped me hone my skills with soldering, wiring, reliability, my scenery skills. Certainly I put them to play there, and ballasting track and that kind of thing. So that was a real bonus for me to be able to build that smaller layout and accomplish actually some scenery, which was big for me, and to hone my some of my modeling skills. And we were in that house for about, I think it was about 15 years. And then along came 2007, and we built our retirement home, which is the home you visited, where I have the upstairs room, which is 30 feet by 40 feet. And it was specifically designed, when we designed the home, we designed that room for Mike's retirement project. Yep. And that's when I started on the Rock Island Midcontinent route. I had so much fun doing that. The planning, I enjoy even the planning aspect of it, which I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted. I had drawn a lot of inspiration from the David Barrow's Cat Mountain in Santa Fe, more the around the walls, kind of a linear with peninsula type design. I had seen a number of photos of his railroad and track layout plans, and I thought that just makes so much sense. And so I built upon that and used that when I designed the layout that we have here in our new home here. It's not a new home anymore from 2007 till now anyway, but it's been so much fun. I started on it we moved in August of 2007, and I started building the railroad pretty much that month. I wanted to get my 2 helixes out of the way, constructed those, and figured that'd be the tougher thing to build. And then from there, it was just start building bench work, getting the bench work out. And it took me from about 2007 to probably 2016. So about a 9-year period to get it to where I would say it's complete, or it's in a state where I was pretty satisfied with it and would only need to come back and put in a lot of extra detail and that kind of thing. So it's been a wonderful experience.
As you're going through this, even, moving in, and of course, your job took you from place to place, and it seems a couple of years here, a couple of years there until you got to Texas and kind of settled in a little bit. And then your first layout there. I want to go back a little bit to that time period. As you're starting to do this, you're doing it in an era that's kind of, I would say, probably just about pre-internet, or just as the internet's starting to come. So where are you starting to meet people? Where are you starting to get your influences? You mentioned the Cat Mountain, but as you're honing your skills and doing all this, where is all of that information coming from?
Yeah, well, poring over photos and articles in Model Railroader, Railroad Model Craftsman, Model Railroad Planning. Of course, great model railroads came out. I think I can't remember, the first issue was in the 90s. So I think maybe it could have been the late 80s, but great model railroads to me. I couldn't wait for that issue to come out. I would just sit there and drool over the photos in there and think, wow, how do these people, that are building these layouts, how are they doing this? And interestingly enough, the Walthers catalog has, at the time, had a lot of photos that people would send in of their layouts. And I'd start leafing through photos in the Walthers catalog of all places and of course, all you have to do is look at that catalog and that's an inspiration in and of itself. But I really think it was that. And, going to, when we lived in Denver, we had Caboose Hobbies, which I could never get enough of. It just, I've never been in a model railroad hobby shop like that. There may be better ones, but I don't know where they are. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore. But there was inspiration in that hobby shop, and then even in Texas here, we've got we still to this day have a really good model train shop and called Discount Model Trains, and I've spent a lot of money over there, and they've got some great people running that place. But on the railroad, the Burlington Northern, there's a number of us that are model railroaders in this. So back in the 90s, we moved here in 93. So about 97 or so, there were 6 of us, all Burlington Northern employees, that formed a little group called the Rail Barons. And it was just our own little model railroad group that would get together, and we would operate on each other's railroad and, share ideas, share issues, just have a good time. And, one of the bonuses of that is that we had a nice little hobby shop up in Denton, Texas, just north of here. And Chuck Bickhouse, who was the owner of that hobby shop, would give us a 10% discount on anything we bought in his store because we were an actual railroad group called the Rail Barons. So that was nice of Chuck to give us that discount, and we all took advantage of it. And Chuck was pleased to get the business, so that was kind of fun. But we've got some really great model railroaders, as in this area, and even back in the early 90s and mid 90s, some of those same folks have their same railroad. Oie Melhouse, a good friend of mine, Burlington Northern retiree, BNSF. Has his little N gauge layout called the Dakota Northern. And so I used to, in the 90s, would spend a lot of time with him. And he's a great resource for anything related to model railroads. He's kind of a master at many things. So I relied on a lot of my good friends and my fellow prototype employees to really get after fine-tuning the model railroad and learning about operations on the model railroad.
I'm sure you've been asked this before, but it's still a concept that fascinates me. The idea of prototypical railroaders that are into model railroading, because you think, your daytime job, you're seeing this all day, and, some of the shifts you talk about, and being on call 24 hours a day in some parts of your job, and the stresses involved and everything else. And then, but it's your hobby too, and I wonder, do airline pilots fly RC planes, and, do truck drivers model trucks? And for railroaders, it seems very common. It's just a neat aspect that the passion of railroading, that goes beyond, even when you have it as a job, as your, 9 to 5, although I'm sure the hours were never 9 to 5, are now, also becomes your hobby, and you just have that much love for it.
Yeah, and I think it's just something. It's really it's hard to explain, but I think it's in the blood, and you either have it or you don't. And I can say all of us that formed this, the six of us that formed this Rail Barons, every one of those railroaders, prototype railroaders, great employees on the railroad, and they were hardcore model railroaders and still are to this day. It's just amazing that I think you just have this fascination for. In my case, probably the prototype experiences I had as a young child, watching these massive locomotives pulling, 150 car freight trains at 50, 60 miles an hour, and just the momentum and the power and the ground shaking. I actually would become hypnotized by it and just loved it. And I think that really carries over then into the modeling world, where you want to recreate these prototype empires in scale. And so I think it's in the blood. In my case, it is. I just, as I say, people, I've been accused of not broadening my horizons enough. I'm so focused on just trains and the real thing and models, but I'm happy in my lot in life. So I'm good with it.
It sounds narrow-minded when you say railroading and model railroading, but it's certainly not, because once you get into that category, it widens very wide into a multitude of different things that you can really love.
No, that's very true. I agree with that. But just thinking about developing this model railroading interest and the John Allen's Gory and Defeated back in the 60s and 70s, model railroader, again, you just, Bruce Chubb, Sunset Valley, Alan McClellan, Tony Custer. I mean, the list goes on. A couple other, I think, real formative experiences I had. The Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry back in the 60s and 70s had an O-scale Santa Fe model railroad, just beautiful. And I remember going with, again, my uncle. When I visited him in Chicago, we went to the Museum of Science and Industry, and there's that O-scale Santa Fe model railroad. And I would just stare at that thing and watch it. I could have watched it all day, but was not able to. And another one that really was a great experience. When I worked up in Wisconsin at this train museum in the Wisconsin Dells, which is it's kind of a real touristy area, not far from where our museum is. There was an O-scale Milwaukee Road layout called the Wisconsin Dells Minorama. And it was basically somebody had recreated the Wisconsin Dells area in O-scale, and this business was right on Main Street. So you could just walk into this place. I suppose there might have been a cover charge. Somebody probably paid my way, but as a young kid. Yep. And I'd get in there and just put my nose against the glass and watch these Milwaukee Road Hiawatha's. They had a steam-powered Atlantic pulling Hiawatha, and then they had some diesel-powered freight trains, and just, man, for a kid to watch that kind of thing and then just think, in your brain, someday I'm going to be able to have something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Leaves quite an impression.
For sure. So as we're heading towards the beginning of the Midcontinent route that you built, I know that one of the things that I noticed here, and you got covered yet again in Railroad Model Craftsman leading up to the Texas Express National Convention, an empire built for operations is what it says. So I'm kind of curious, what gave you, let's say, your first real introduction to operations in model railroading?
Probably going back into the Rail Barons era. In the 90s, when our 6 BN employees, I would say going over and operating on Oie Melhouse's N-scale Dakota Northern was really my first introduction to what I would call serious operating scheme, where you're actually using a switch list and you have operating train order to tell you what moves to make and where to meet trains and that kind of thing. And, I, of course, working for the real railroad, you understand operations and you understand track warrants and that kind of thing. And I decided when I built this Midcontinent route of the Rock Island lines that I really wanted to have some operating sessions. And I'll have to admit, I haven't had very many operating sessions. I've had about 4 operating sessions prior to COVID, and since COVID, I haven't had any. But I do have a plan this fall before the end of the year to have one, hopefully next spring. But when I have had operating sessions, typically about 13 people to operate. We'll usually operate about 4 mainline freights, a local, couple passenger trains, and I have used a kind of a hybrid train order track warrant control format for the authority for operations, but I haven't done the dispatching thing just yet. But I've almost got that worked out. I've got 2 gentlemen. In fact, they're coming over here next week because they've indicated they want to dispatch on my layout, and I've got all the equipment acquired to get them trained up so that they can actually dispatch and issue train order track warrant authorities to the operators, and so we can have more of what I would consider more of a realistic operating session.
That's great. I mean, this is a railroad that is meant to be operated, but let's get back to the point where you're building it. You move into your home in 2007. Beautiful home, by the way. It's absolutely gorgeous in a beautiful neighborhood. And I go upstairs, I get to the top of the stairs, and you get this wide open, beautiful room. But it's kind of like you said, second story room, right? Because there's no basements in Texas. Let's clarify that, at least in North Texas, right? So,
right.
So you've got this beautiful room. Did you buy the home? Did you plan for this room for the railroad as you were kind of designed for that?
We sure did. We ended up, we actually purchased the lot a few years before the home, and then we worked with an architect designing the home. And so one of the criteria, one of the givens and druthers, the givens was that we had to have this room on the second floor for the model railroad. And the architect he did exactly everything that I, had kind of guided him. And, we had to make obviously some different iterations to the design, but it turned out, just fine. And I think it was, I always like to tell the story when we were building the house and finishing off the room. A lot of the folks that were doing the finish work, drywall and that kind of thing, they kept saying, "Now, can you explain exactly what it is you're doing here?" And I said, "Well, it's going to be a model railroad." And they said, I can't picture it. And I said, "Well, just kind of picture something following the walls all the way around the room." And they said, "Still can't picture it." And I said, "Well, you come back and, after we've been in the house a few years and I've got this built, you're invited to come back." Of course, none of them have ever been back to see it, but I think it is hard to conceptualize unless you've actually been in the hobby and kind of understand what that's all about when you look at the around the wall type design.
Yeah. So you have this all designed, and one thing I can say is when you go in, I mean, just that the finish is super. I mean, just, you've got this pretty much set up the way it should do. Get the room finished, get it nice, get the floors in, and just get it. And you've done that. It presents so well because you've done that. You must have had this plan. Was there multiple drafts of a track plan, or did you pretty much know what you were doing going in and kind of stuck to it?
So I had a design. I had been working on a track plan for a number of years ahead of building the house, because I knew that, had a pretty good idea we were going to have a certain size room. And I would say when I drew up the plans for this existing layout, that it was probably about 70% correct to what you see today. That there were 30% that I modified. When you get to laying out and actually building the layout and you're laying out track and you realize, well, that curve's a little that curve's just a little too sharp. I'm going to ease it up a little bit. So I'm going to change this design. I'm going to have to get rid of that switch in that particular industry. And so I pretty much stuck to it. But again, I'm very flexible during the construction. And one of the things that I kind of evolved into as I built it was I wanted to have a lot of open space for open running. I love to watch a 30-car freight train wind its way through some open country where there aren't any buildings and, just kind of winding its way around the layout. And I did actually forego a couple of stations or towns because I wanted to have that open territory. So I'm building this and I've got this idea. I'm going to put this town in here. And then I stand back and look at it and say, you know what? If I don't put that town in there, I can have a nice wide open running space. And so that's kind of what I did. And for me, it's worked out very well. I enjoy that because I just love to watch a long train wind its way around the railroad.
I'm gonna tell you a story about the wide open space that you have, and I think we've had these conversations multiple times, and we talked a little bit Joe Mammy, and of course his influence from Lance Minheim, and talking about negative space and open space. So when I came in and I saw the layout, and that's one of the very first things I noticed, other than obviously the beautiful presentation and very professional way that you've done things on your fascia and just very well presented. But I saw the open space and I was just so blown away. I got the phone out and I'm just taking pictures of all the open space, and I collected up on the phone, of course. And I'm telling Joe Mammy as I'm heading from one stop to the other, probably got him on the phone and said, "Oh, you got to see this layout. I'll have to tell you about it, blah, blah, blah." And so I told him, and then I stayed with my grandparents when I was down in Texas. I'm very fortunate to have my grandparents still. My grandfather just turned 88. So they're down in Bridgeport. So I got over to their house and I was still excited. I was like, "Well, you should see this layout. It's just gorgeous. I love it. And the way it's laid out." And I said, "Here, look at the pictures." So they're sliding through the pictures and they're like, "Yeah, it's great, but where are the towns?" And I was like, "You know what? I didn't even take pictures of the towns. I mean, your towns are beautiful," but I was just so blown away by the idea of you've done such an excellent job with this just very simple but elegant open space. And it's exactly that. That's what it looks like. You pull on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere and watch a train go by. And that was just so appealing to me.
And that you've hit the nail on the head. And of course, a lot of the community refers to that as negative space.
Right.
That is the memory I have, especially in Iowa.
Right.
If you're going to go out rail fanning, you can zip out of a town pretty quick, and you're out in the open country, and it's flat. A lot of flat farmland, and of course the Rock Islands Midcontinent route. It bisected right through that, and I just can remember these long freight trains just stretched out for a mile, coming down on tangent track, and there again, I'm sure that had a lot to do with my desire to have some of this negative space on this model railroad. But
yeah, of course. I mean, it's capturing a memory. It's
It really
capturing
is.
your memories and your love for the Rock Island and your childhood of rail fanning, and now you get to do it again on the second floor of your home in North Texas. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing what you've done there.
Yeah, no, it's
and I'm
fun.
I'm sure what it did for you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it probably made this a little bit more achievable because you weren't worried about putting in another town and another town and another town. You could model this, empty. Not to say that it was easy, but it certainly makes it seem more achievable when you're doing a lot more of that negative space and you're able to model it that way.
Oh, it definitely does. And I do think there are a number of people that they don't have the space for a large railroad, and I appreciate that, and therefore they want to, of course, take advantage of what they've got and put some buildings in there, and so they may not be able to have the negative space. But I'm very fortunate with this layout to be able to do that, and so I did take advantage of it. And I agree. When I went to build during the construction phase and even laying the track, it went pretty quick when you don't have to mess with a lot of industrial tracks and that kind of thing. But I did weave enough industries on the layout to keep it interesting for a local that works its way around the layout to do some switching and, for through freights to set out some hot cars occasionally. And then, of course, my two major yards, one at Kansas City and one in the St. Paul area. I've got plenty of switching activity there with those tracks in the yards. So lots to do for the operators.
Yeah, let's talk about your layout and some of the things that you've included. You talk about the yards, and obviously, the inclusion of your childhood hometown is also super cool in this. Yeah.
So Nevada, because that, of course, was probably the area location that had the biggest influence on me modeling the Rock Island. I thought, I've just got to pay homage to Nevada. And a friend of mine, I've mentioned already, Oie Melhouse, is a master scratch builder of structures. And when I was working, he and I were both working on the railroad. He walked into my office one day and set a box on my desk, and he said, "Here, this is for you." And it was an exact replica, 100% of the Nevada Rock Island Depot, weathered. I mean, just like I remember it in the 60s. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I said, I couldn't thank him enough. And that is, of course, on the layout now in a very prominent location. And I've tried to at least model Nevada as close to the prototype, but I got a little bit of a space problem even in that area, so I wasn't able to do everything. But I did, of course, include that station, which he did such a beautiful job of building. And then Olie actually built, I think it's 6 other scratch-built structures that I have on the layout. And again, they are exact replicas. I was able to get photographs and drawings of these structures and put together an HO scale drawing to give to Olie, and then he built them. And what a fine job he did. And I, of course, have got them. All of those structures are prominently displayed on the layout.
Good to have friends able to help. And
oh, yeah.
It allows you to tell a story like you just did, when you look at this station. And by the way, Dan Munson did an awesome job capturing your layout. And in this article, I'm going through again, the June 2023 issue of Railroad Model Craftsman, and yeah, just absolutely gorgeous and a great coverage of your layout here.
Yeah, Dan Munson did a fine job. Those photographs that he was able to take, and then I know he did a little photoshopping on them.
Magic.
But oh my gosh, it's just magic what he did with those photos, with the exhaust and the ballast dust kicking up under those locomotives, and I mean it's. He did me proud. I'll tell you, he did the layout proud. I could not thank him enough. And in fact, there's a number of those pictures I told him I'm going to probably end up framing because he did such a nice job on them. Yeah, he did great. And he was able to take those photos. This was last summer when he took those photos. I was still up in Minnesota, so I had to make arrangements for some friends, good old model railroad friends, to come over and power up the layout and and kind of get him staged correctly with some trains and all that kind of thing. So, like you say, it's good to have friends in the model railroading business.
That's for sure.
And I've got a lot of them.
So we talk about, we talk about places. We mentioned your hometown of Nevada. And then what else were some of the areas like you knew you just had to have as you were putting this together?
Sure. Another location that I really, I guess, was a given that I really wanted to have was Clear Lake Junction, which is where the Iowa Traction, it was called, in the 60s, it was called the Iowa Terminal Railway. Now it's called the Iowa Traction. And it's an electric railway, overhead catenary, that crosses the railroad at Clear Lake Junction. Now, that track through Clear Lake Junction is actually, in the 60s, what I model is Chicago Great Western owned. So the Chicago Great Western owned and maintained that track, but the Rock Island had running rights, trackage rights over that segment. But I just thought, because of the Iowa Terminal Catenary Railroad, I just thought I've got to have that crossing on a crossing diamond right there at Clear Lake Junction. That little traction railway is still in existence today. I don't know how much longer the overhead wire is going to last, but I think it's remarkable that it's lasted this long. I'm sure. Just I'm just shocked that it's lasted, but I suspect, I hope not, but I just have the feeling over the next few years that they're going to be probably retiring those electric locomotives and bringing in some diesels to run that operation. But so that was another one that, and then Albert Lee, which is in the southern portion of Minnesota, was a location that when I was a kid growing up in Nevada, we would travel up to Albert Lee to see some elderly relatives that we had. And, that station at Albert Lee and the Wilson packing plant, which is near the station, was a scene that I just thought, well, I need to make sure I include that as well. And then Shipley, which is nothing more than a fertilizer distributor on my layout, is named after my great-grandfather. And I actually there's a school in Shipley, and now Shipley is located about maybe 4 miles southwest of Nevada. And the Nevada School District had an elementary school at Shipley, and I attended school there for 2 years. And that little burg, which wasn't much of a burg, was named after my great-grandfather, who was a merchant in Iowa Falls, Iowa, in the 1900s, early 1900s, and he was named at that time was called the Town Lot Committee head of that, to go out of Iowa Falls heading toward Des Moines and establish station areas for what would soon become the Rock Island. At that time, this was like 1902, it was called the Des Moines, Iowa Falls and Northern Railway, which through a series of mergers and acquisitions eventually became the Rock Island. But so I had to, of course, pay homage to my great-grandfather, Shipley, and included that. And then I guess the next one that was really of significance was the Des Moines station area, because, again, my birthday presents, riding the plainsman down into the Des Moines station and getting off the train and looking around at this great big passenger station, very unique design. I just had to include that on the layout as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing how you've captured all this, your childhood memories, your family history into it. It's just amazing. And does it feel that way when you walk through that door and you see your layout now in a pretty finished state and all the scenery done? And, does it feel like that, kind of that trip in time? Yeah,
it really does. And I have actually both passenger trains 17 and 18 replicated on the layout, and they stay pretty much intact. And I'll fire them up and run them around the layout, especially number 17, which is the train that I rode.
Yep.
And, just make its way around the layout. But I have to tell you a little story about those passenger trains in the station there in Nevada on the prototype back in the 60s. I would spend the weekends, Saturday, I'd go down to the depot, the Rock Island Depot, because there was a good chance that the station agent, his name was Glenn French, was going to get called in by the dispatcher out of Des Moines to hand up train orders to passenger train number 18, usually. And that was, passenger train number 18 came through at about, I think, like 2:50 in the afternoon. So it was, good daylight. And it wasn't a dark time. And I would go down there just to make sure I could see him hand up these train orders to this passenger train roaring by at 60 miles an hour. And, you talk about an impression left on a kid.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the first time I watched him hand up train orders to that train. I was so scared. I grabbed the side of the depot, the windowsill on the window. I grabbed it with all my might because I thought the train was going to suck me under.
Yeah.
It was just, and he had, when he handed those train orders up, he used 3 train order hoops, and this was all manual, handing them up. Of course, he had to hand one up to the head end of the locomotive, and then a couple cars later, you'd have what I assumed was the conductor grab the orders, and then the rear of the train was the rear brakeman. Yep. Would grab those orders. And he had placed, he probably didn't place, but there were 2 track spikes driven into the platform where he would create his stance for his feet. And he knew if he stood on those spike heads, that he was a safe distance and the appropriate distance to hand that train order hoop up so that they'd all be able to grab the orders. It's quite a production,
Sure.
and quite a memory.
I bet. And now you've kind of incorporated that with some train orders into your operating scheme. You had at the open house, you had this beautiful trifold that you had left for I hope for us to take home. Otherwise, you've got one here in Plainfield, Connecticut that got snuck out of Texas. But and this is beautiful. I mean, this is the stuff that I say, a man after my own heart when I start to see this stuff, because I just love this professionalism in the paperwork or the fascias. You've got all your graphics are clean. Everything's just presented so well. And then it's so professional. This looks like a document that would have been on the Rock Island somewhere around Sunday, October 30th, 1966. I mean, it's just so well done.
Well, thank you. And I really developed that timetable more for fun than anything. It's because of I don't use a fast clock, and I don't really intend to use a fast clock for my operating sessions. And the best way to use a timetable and train order operation is with a fast clock, when you're doing it in scale, because then you can stretch times out to where they're more realistic. And I really decided I wasn't going to do that. I was just going to use my train order track warrant format to give authority, which really negates the need for a timetable when you do that. But I really wanted to have a timetable so I could kind of lay it out in a very almost one-for-one copy in terms of the mileposts and whatnot of the old original timetable on the Rock Island in that on that territory. So I had fun putting that together.
I bet.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, and you did an awesome job with this. And again, I'm just blown away. I don't know what to say other than I'm more than sure that you don't have any problems finding people to operate your railroad.
No, and again, there's, we've got a great group down here, with Dean Ferris and Oie Melhouse and, Ron Brooks, and just a number of folks that, Greg McComas, they have great model railroads. They have great operating sessions, and it's always nice to reciprocate and have them over and operate.
You have a fantastic group down there in Texas, and I certainly enjoy going down there for pleasure. Went down there for the National Convention and get down there. I try to get down there twice a year to see my grandparents. And I'm amazed at not only the awesome prototype railroading you have down there, of course, with the BNSF, UP, and whatever they want to call KCS this week, and whatever else that's going on down. Just amazing amount of railroading down there. And then on top of that, the model railroading scene is extremely strong in that Dallas-Fort Worth area.
It really is. People have, you wouldn't think that N scale would be as big as it is, but most of my buddies are N scale modelers, and they're just beautiful layouts. Dean Ferris and Oie Melhouse's layouts, N scale, just fantastic. And it has, N scale has just come a long way in the last couple decades. I can remember back in the 60s in just seeing stuff in N scale. I wasn't interested in it. And of course it was small and the couplers were way oversized. The wheels, the flanges were all way too deep. It's just come a long way. And it's beautiful stuff. And these people that are modeling in N scale around here have done a really nice job. But then again, there's a lot of HO scale modelers and even some O scalers. So, it's great.
And they're getting it done without basements. It's amazing. Yeah. You talk about yours with a second room, and Dean Ferris has got a second room, and Devin Jackson builds a building out back in his yard, and Chris Adkins brings in he's got a section house that he's got his layout in, and just absolutely amazing, the stuff. And then, David Hyde, he takes and just, uses his garage and puts a layout inside that. So just amazing the amount of railroads that are down there in Texas, despite the lack of basement, and getting it done with some outstanding and well-running layouts. And I can't wait to get back down to Texas and get my hand on a throttle on yours.
That'd be great. And actually, you can have a basement in Texas, but it's very expensive and it's a little bit risky. But there are occasionally people who do basements. Now, if you do a walkout basement, a little less risky. And one of our rail barons actually had a walkout basement in his home, but it's rare. And again, if you want a regular basement that's dug into the ground, it's rare because it's the soil down here is just too active. You're just going to have problems. So it's not worth it, in my opinion.
Right. But it can be done, and there's ways to do it, and you guys are doing an excellent job. So, well, we've hit our mark here on this episode of Around the Layout, and boy, it was just so exciting to be able to get you on here, especially after seeing this layout and getting to talk a bit about it. And I think there's a whole lot more to cover, so we'll have to get you back on at another point. But for now, I want to wrap it up to share with everybody about this layout. If you want to check this out, YouTube channel RI Modeler 7963 is on YouTube. Yes, we'll put that in the show notes. Also, if you want to see some more, check out that June 2023 article of Railroad Model Craftsman. You can go to White River Productions and order that back issue or get a digital copy of it. And just a great layout to see. And if you're ever down in Texas and you get the opportunity, this is the layout to go check out. So, Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story.
Ray, it was my pleasure, and I thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.